There are forces of good and forces of evil at work in the world today. What are these forces? Who is responsible for the good? And who is responsible for the evil? Richard Schaff talks about current events which are rarely discussed by the mainstream media, events that affect us all. This program seeks to identify, to inform, and to equip the believer for what's ahead. Welcome to What in the World is Going On?
This is What in the World's Going On. I'm your host, Richard Schaff. Program is sponsored by Lincoln Log Homes. We are pro-Christian, pro-American, pro-life, pro-Second Amendment, here only by the grace of God. Well, the big news out of Washington for quite some time has been impeachment. Let's talk about the impeachment of our president. Our president was just impeached this past week. A lot of people don't understand it. They think that, boy, that's the end. No, that's not the end. And in spite of all that the Dems have done to try to make it the end of our president, while they've been doing nothing but impeach, he's replaced NAFTA with a new trade deal with Mexico and Canada. He's working with a big trade deal on China. Supposedly phase one is under control. He's gotten increased funding in big time for the military. We've got the best economic numbers on record for low unemployment. We've got record highs in jobs, particularly for those of the minorities. And now they're still talking about impeachment. In fact, I saw the other day where they were saying, well, if he gets off this time, we can impeach him next time. Well, there may not be a next time for Democrats controlling the House of Representatives. But now it moves to the Senate, and there our president says he doesn't care whether it's a long or a short session. They can, if they have 51 votes, they can throw it out right away, or they can try him. Then it takes 67 to get rid of him, which is a relatively safe number, of course. But anyway, looking at where we're at right now, all that has happened is a Democrat-controlled committee in the House of Representatives voted strictly by party lines. It was 23 Democrats, and I believe it was 14 Republicans. It was 14 or 17. They voted party lines to take it to the full Senate, which is going to now come up this coming week. And then it moves to the Senate, where, of course, the Republicans have control, and the dictatorship, the political impeachment that's been practiced by the House will be over. But let's start with this. Alan Dershowitz says that the Dems have really been abusing their power. He says, and I quote, the House Democrats are abusing their congressional power in seeking impeachment of President Trump. Dershowitz is the well-known attorney and Harvard law professor. And another quote from him, the framers debated whether to make maladministration the grounds for impeachment. That would be just being a bad president, not having good politics. But the framers of it back in the times of James Madison rejected that because that would give Congress too much power over the president. Dershowitz pointed to the four constitutional criteria for impeachment, which House Democrats did not meet, and he pointed out what they would have been. And he points out also that Congress is not above the law. They can't make it up as they go along. They have to find one of those four elements. It's not treason. It's not bribery. It's not a high crime. It's not a misdemeanor. And as Dershowitz points out under the Constitution, it's not impeachable. Now, Dershowitz, who voted for former Vice President Joe Biden before, said he might again if he were to be the Democrat presidential nominee, called the current process impeachment in search of a crime when it's not even there. His quote again on this is not a crime. This is an argument against policy. Whether the policy with Ukraine is the right policy or the wrong policy. You can't criminalize it, he added. You can't weaponize foreign policy and turn it into a crime without a criminal statute. It's just not there. So, I don't even get to the evidence, the presumptions, the inferences, because even if all the evidence is there is not a crime. A quote from Alan Dershowitz. What might be there is revealed in testimony brought by the House Democrat inquiry on grounds to vote Trump out of office in 2020. There may have been a testimony to give people a good reason for voting against Trump because that's their business, he pointed out. That's why we've got elections. But you don't try to remove a duly elected president from office because you disagree with his policies. A quote from Alan Dershowitz, a very well-known constitutional lawyer and a confessed Democrat. And sidebar to that, our good Representative Meadows points out that Dershowitz ought to be added to Trump's impeachment defense team. North Carolina Republican Meadows thinks Donald Trump should add the Harvard law professor. He says, I've advocated that there needs to be one other attorney that's added to the mix for the president, and that's Alan Dershowitz. Meadows said this in an appearance on the House Freedom Caucus podcast. Dershowitz said the articles of impeachment unveiled by House Democrats failed to meet the constitutional standards. And Meadows in the podcast also said Trump wanted a combination of lawyers from his team and House Republicans to manage his impeachment defense in the Senate. The president believes that it needs to be a combination of lawyers from his team. So perhaps as a Jay Sekulow, Pat Cipollone, some of their team, they've got some very capable lawyers in the general counsel's office, Meadows said. Dershowitz would be a final touch. And North Carolina's own U.S. Senator Tillis points out that the Senate trial will expose a very weak case for the Democrats. A full impeachment trial on 2 articles of impeachment against President Donald Trump will show the House Democrats' case against him is, quote, very weak. That a quote from Senator Thom Tillis last Tuesday. I think it's a trial where the president for the first time will have his defense counsel asking the questions. Potentially he'll be asking for depositions of the whistleblower and others that we haven't seen. We don't even have any records on them. Fox pointed this out on Fox News, America's Newsroom. He added he believes Trump wants his case to be heard and that they will undermine the Democrats' claims on what is a very weak case, one that certainly doesn't rise to the state Senate convening as a jury and then considering the removal of the President of the United States. A quote, again, from Senator Thom Tillis. You see, facts don't lie. And folks, I'll share with this 5 key facts the House Democrats want you, the American voter, to ignore. This came to me, it was posted by Sean Hannity and his staff. The House Democrats continued to promote their nonstop Ukraine impeachment fantasy this week. They were holding a series of hearings in Jerry Nadler's committee, while completely ignoring 5 key facts that destroy their own case. First, there's absolutely no evidence of wrongdoing by the President of the United States. To date, Democrats have failed to provide a piece of compelling evidence that Trump did anything wrong. Not one piece. Second, Ukraine President Zelensky and other top officials have confirmed there was no pressure placed on them to investigate Joe Biden or his son. 3, the aid to Ukraine would not have existed without President Trump. The Obama administration rejected that aid for years. 4th, there's no evidence of obstruction of justice or obstruction of Congress. 5, the impeachment process is unprecedented and unfair. The Democrats have routinely violated prior examples and shrouded the proceedings in secrecy in an attempt to get rid of President Trump. Hey, Nancy Pelosi even admits she tried to get rid of Trump 2.5 years ago. Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi weighed in on the Democrats' never-ending impeachment fantasy this past week. She admitted her party's been trying to remove Trump for the last 2.5 years. A quote from Nancy Pelosi. One of the biggest criticisms of the process has been the speed at which the House is moving, said the interviewer at a speaking event. Well, Pelosi said it's been going on for 22 months, 2.5 years, actually, she said. Words out of the old lady's mouth. And after the Big Shift show finale, public support craters for impeachment. That's right, folks. Not too long ago, the press was calling President Trump a goner. Remember that early October Fox News poll that shocked so many people? They had it that a majority of randomly selected registered voters, 50 to 41%, were all in for impeaching and removing the president. We had our doubts, but the press reported that it's perfectly representative of public opinion, undoubtedly a lit fuse to the eventual ouster of President Trump. Here's what Peggy Noonan was saying after that one. Impeachment, of course, will happen. Of course it did, folks. Of course it did. But that's not the end of the act. That's not the final song. Polling on the impeachment has been fairly consistent, with Gallup reporting just last Thursday 52 supporting the president's impeachment and removal. Serious and dramatic hearings would move the needle on public opinion, tipping it into seriously negative territory for the president. And if the needle moves, the Senate will move in the same direction. This, as it turns out, is exactly what did not happen. Here's the latest poll from the nonpartisan Quinnipiac University, reported by the Daily Caller. A Quinnipiac University national poll released last Tuesday shows a majority of voters oppose impeaching and removing President Donald Trump from office. The poll shows registered voters oppose removing the president from office by a 51 to 45 margin. Independents opposed impeaching and removing Trump by a 52 to 44 margin. Quinnipiac poll was done on that one too. So now we've got the impeachment needle moving decisively on the other side. Not only did the needle not move the way Noonan forecast, and Pelosi thought it might, or hoped it did, but it moved in exactly the opposite direction. What happened? Well, I think three things stood out. One, the Democrats didn't have much of a case, so they put their thumbs on the scale. They hid the whistleblower, for one, despite evidence that he was no lonely voice crying in the wilderness, but really he was a guy who carefully coordinated with Schiff, his staff, and a lot of Democrats before filing. Two, unable to get any sort of solid or first-hand case against Trump except through the lone testimony of rabid deep state partisans, such as the petty, self-important Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Vindman. They shifted their arguments. First, it was national security endangered. Then it was quid pro quo, as if a political horse trading was going to happen. Then it became bribery, despite the fact that the only cash that changed hands was the U.S. cash that went to Ukraine, and Ukrainian cash that went into Hunter Biden's pocket. So somehow Trump's the one who took the bribe, but it didn't work out that way. Three, they blew the public hearings. CNN reported in mid-November that they were getting nervous, and Breitbart reported that Black and Hispanic support for impeachment was collapsing. Pelosi was nervous. Politico reported in late November that the House Judiciary hearings were going to be their big turnaround, their do-or-die moment, their one final shot to drive up public support for impeachment. Well, how'd those things work out? Seems they'd had about a day of those with three screaming leftist professors, one of them cheap-shotting a 12-year-old's name for laughs. Representative Al Green put his 2 cents in, saying he was unhappy that there were no black faces among the professors that were questioned. Noonan's analysis, if you reread that piece, turns out to have been prophetic. Democrats, being leftists, went and did everything she told them not to do. They were manifestly unfair. They bored the heck out of the public. I don't know whether you watched it, folks, but I watched a little bit of it. And I'm a political junkie, and I had to go. I went to Spectrum News. Anyway, the public was bored because they didn't have anything to say, and they were constantly shifting their narratives. Bottom line, the impeachment case is pure garbage, and the more information that rolls out about it, the less the public likes it. No wonder the polls have flipped. If Democrats can't respect the results of a 3-year-old election, they can't play fair, can't keep their scandal straight, and then hold a credibility public hearing without sending in the clowns, who needs it? No wonder the public wants the entire impeachment case to be thrown out, folks. Hey, and by the way, the public are the ones that vote, and we've got a vote coming up in about a year. Let me reference this for a second. Lloyd Marcus is an Afro-American who happens to be conservative. He's also a writer. He's an American thinker a lot. I got an article from him that I'm going to be referencing in the following report. To say that we the people are outraged over the Democrats' baseless, absurd articles of impeachment against our president would be an understatement. That is from Lloyd Marcus. Candidly, I've had to talk with my feisty Irish Cherokee wife, and I've had to talk her down from throwing a brick through our television. Another quote from Marcus. Those ignorant scumbags in essence are saying, screw you 63 million Americans who elected this guy. We're going to smear his blank off. We're going to do it with impeachment. And y'all can't stop us. Well, the most infuriating thing about Democrats and fake news media, fake outrage over Trump's alleged crimes is that everyone knows that Trump didn't do anything wrong. He has functioned totally within his presidential authority. Democrats and media are attempting to criminalize Trump. They don't like it because he's defending himself while exposing their corruption. The only thing Trump is guilty of is keeping his promise to do everything within his power to make America great again. And he's doing a pretty good job of it. Folks, it feels like we're in an episode of The Twilight Zone in which Democrats and media reality are the polar opposites of the truth. Anyway, with straight faces, the Dems authoritatively lie about every issue. Our economy is booming, and yet Democrats and media say people are suffering horribly in Trump's economy. Blacks are enjoying a historic low unemployment rate. Dems and the media tell blacks Trump is a white supremacist seeking to harm them. We're livid that the bad actors in the FBI, CIA, Department of Justice, State Department, and Obama administration illegally conspired to kick Trump out of the White House. These arrogant, treasonous scumbags continue their unlawful assault on our president. They do it in plain sight while they appear on TV with their noses in the air talking down to we the people. Well, my prayer is that the enemies of the Constitution will receive their just rewards. Attorney General Barr, Federal Prosecutor John Durham appear to be hot on their trails, hot with indictments. The revelation that government agencies are involved in the Democrats' silent coup and smear campaign is really pretty disturbing. It's pretty scary to realize that if you upset the Democrats, they will get you. Well, they will, folks. Let's not forget Obama's IRS and what they did with the Tea Party just a short time ago. This whole impeachment scam reminds me of a 1938 Disney movie, Snow White. As a child, I couldn't understand why the Wicked Queen's hatred for Snow White was so great that she was willing to sacrifice her own beauty and even her life to destroy Snow White. Well, folks, we're witnessing the same obsession with Democrats irrationally moving forward with impeachment of our president. Immediately after Trump was elected, Democrats began their impeachment scam. They've ignored numerous issues important to the American people, such as prescription drug prices, border security, the opioid crisis. Democrats know that impeachment scam will crush and burn in the Senate and that they press forward. President Reagan predicted the USSR would collapse due to the weight of its own evil efforts and people. The Democrats' 2020 presidential dreams are collapsing under the weight of their own deranged hatred. For years, Democrats and their media minions appear to win every battle, chipping away at our constitutional freedoms. Who could imagine a day would come when the Democrats' deranged hatred for all things beneficial to America would cause Democrats to eat themselves? Like the Wicked Queen's obsession with destroying Snow White, Democrats deem no cause too great to remove President Trump. I believe we owe the anti-Trump resistance a bit of gratitude. Their hatred created our America First superhero president. Trump was not ideological. When the left immediately sought to block him from making America great again, Trump's eyes were opened. I think he was stunned by leftist extreme hatred for our country. I think this moved Trump closer to we the people. And folks, we're in a spiritual battle for good versus evil. For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places. Ephesians 6:12. I'm going to reread it, folks, from God's Word. For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places. Spiritual wickedness is the root cause of Democrats' hatred for everyday Americans. Democrats vehemently oppose Trump restoring religious liberty, restoring our constitutional freedoms, securing our borders, and governing in the best interest of the American people. But be of good cheer and hang in there, folks. Our Sherlock Holmes, William Barr, and his Dr. Watson, John Durham, are close to cracking the Democrats' evil scam wide open. We the people are so looking forward to crushing the Democrats at the polls in November for their wicked crimes against our president and our America. Amen, folks. Amen. And then the upcoming... Oh, wait, let me get this in. Yeah, I almost forgot this. New polls show the majority of Americans against removing President Donald Trump. Right now, 2 national polls are now showing a majority of Americans who oppose the removal of a president through impeachment, a serious blow to Democrats as they draw up the articles against our commander-in-chief. According to Mammoth Poll, which was released just this past Wednesday, 50% said the president should not be impeached and removed from office, while 45% called for impeachment and removal from the White House. The numbers are little changed from Mammoth's November poll, when a 51-44% majority opposed impeachment and removal, reported by Fox News. In a similar story in Quinnipiac survey, which was released last Tuesday, 51-45% margin, Americans opposed impeaching and removing the president. Little change from the school's late November polling. And get this, in the upcoming election, Trump is surging in the battleground states that will determine the 2020 election. We can expect even more pointless, futile railing against the Electoral College by Democrats demanding a national popular vote, now that their presidential prospects in the key swing states are so bad. I'm old enough that I can remember the Democrats crowing over the blue wall of 18 states, where they consistently voted for the Democrat presidential candidate for 5 straight elections. That started back in 92. Back then, the Dems thought the Electoral College was a great thing. They thought it was really genius. Well, now that the Dems foolishly wrote off the white working class, and as a result handed the GOP a crack at the industrial Midwest, they don't like the consequences. And it looks like Trump is locking down support, while the Dems are digging their holes ever deeper. Firehouse Strategies assembles the following data from Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. This for the 2020 general election poll. Right now, I've got numbers in front of me that show Biden winning against every one of the leading Democrats. His best numbers are against Mayor Pete and Bloomberg. There, he's 11 points ahead of both of them, or either one. The closest one coming to him would be Biden, who's 5 points behind in Michigan. Going over to Pennsylvania, Trump does best against Sanders and Mayor Pete. He's 10 points ahead of him. The one that comes the closest there is Bloomberg. He's 4 points behind. And then let's go over to Wisconsin. Trump's best shot there, tied against 2 of them, both Warren and Sanders. Of course, a lot can happen in 11 months. Some of what's going to happen involves some indictments that are coming from U.S. Attorney John Durham. Can the Dems crawl back out of their hole? So far, folks, they haven't even stopped digging. Keep digging, folks. Now to the Senate. Let's go over to the Senate. Mitch McConnell can move to acquit Trump, not dismiss charges. Trump's willing to go either way. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell is expected to allow an impeachment trial against Trump to go ahead, calling a vote to acquit him after proceedings rather than run the course than seeking to immediately dismiss the charges, according to some Republican senators. Just to analyze this, folks, McConnell can either call for a vote if he has 51 votes and throw the thing out, or they can have a trial, okay? And then it would take 67 votes to get him out. Trump originally talked like he wanted that trial. He wanted to be able to question his accusers. I know I would too. McConnell can go either way. Trump says he's happy with whatever direction Mitch wants to go. Acquittal, rather than a procedural vote to dismiss the articles of impeachment, would definitely clear the president of the charges raised against him by Dems and expected to be approved by the House. It would make more sense to vote on the articles of impeachment than it would be to simply dismiss them. A quote from Senator John Cornyn, second highest Republican in the Senate. Dismissal requires a simple 51-vote majority, and such a vote could end in a tie with all the recriminations that would flow from that, Cronin pointed out. Adding to the Constitution, it would take, according to the Constitution, it would take 67 votes in the Senate to convict Trump and to remove him from office. That threshold is unlikely to be reached. A second Republican senator, speaking to CNN, said McConnell will not call a vote to remove the articles of impeachment unless he's certain he's got at least 51 votes lined up for the trial. McConnell can't count on the votes here of Mike Pence to break the tie. You know, Pence, as president of the Senate, has the mandate to break ties on legislation and nomination, but Pence cannot vote in an impeachment proceeding. This according to a legislative aide, because he'd be replacing Trump if he was removed from office. Senate Republicans, according to the Washington Post, say they favor a short, limited trial with no witnesses, followed by a quick vote to acquit the president. Under this plan, the trial would be held early next year. McConnell hinted at the acquittal strategy to reporters last Tuesday when he told the Senate has two choices after it hears opening arguments from the House and Trump's defense counsel. Many Senate Republicans say they trust McConnell's judgment in this matter. Here it's all going to be different, folks. Old Shifty Schiff and Nadler, they've had their way. They could make their own rules. They did. Show's over. We got the Republicans in control of the U.S. Senate. And again, that impeachment needle is not moving as the majority of voters oppose removing Trump. President Donald Trump blasted the House Democrats' articles of impeachment. Trump calls the decision to draft articles of impeachment sheer political madness. This came to us from Chief White House correspondent John Roberts. He reports, as the House of Representatives began drafting articles of impeachment against Trump, two new national polls indicate a majority of Americans still oppose impeaching and removing the Republican president from office. American voters signal they're more inclined not to impeach than to impeach. Quinnipiac polls, as we reported just a few minutes ago. And one of the reasons that Trump is so popular? Promises kept, folks. Here's a list of President Trump's 289 accomplishments in 20 months. Comes to me from Sean Hannity's staff. President Trump premised his 2016 campaign for the White House on keeping his promises. That's a pledge long ignored by lifelong politicians inside the Beltway. From judicial appointments to eliminating burdensome business regulations, the Washington Examiner compiled a list of 289 major accomplishments delivered by the president in just 20 months. Trump's success in reducing the cost of taxes and regulations, rebuilding our military, avoiding wars of choice, and changing the court's rivals, all those of previous Republican presidents. A quote from Grover Norquist, president of Americans for Tax Reform. Here's a list of what he's done. Economic growth, a 4.2% growth in the second quarter of 18. For the first time in more than a decade, growth is projected to exceed 3% over the calendar years. On jobs, 4 million new jobs have been created since the election, and more than 3.5 million since Trump took office. More Americans are employed now than ever before in our history. Jobless claims at the lowest level in nearly 5 decades. The economy's achieved the longest positive job growth record on record. Small business optimism has hit historic heights. NFIB's Small Business Optimism Index broke a 35-year-old record last August. SurveyMonkey's CNBC Small Business Confidence Survey for the third quarter of 18 matched its all-time high. Manufacturers are more confident than ever. 95% of manufacturers are optimistic about the future, the highest ever. Proposed infrastructure plan would utilize $200 billion in federal funds to spur at least $1.5 trillion in infrastructure investment across the country. Executive orders expediting environmental reviews and approval for high-priority infrastructure products. And plus one other thing, folks, divine intervention. As I've said before, I firmly believe that Donald Trump is president because of praying America and because of the actions and will of our Lord. I've seen that bumper sticker. God plus one is a majority. No, folks. God is the majority. God puts kings upon the throne. He removes rulers. and has throughout history. Keep praying, America. 2020 can be ours for a continuation of our freedoms, our economy, our republic, for godly answers by God's man for the hour. Keep your prayers up, and God will remain in control. Goodbye until next week.